have a letter from Speaker Madigan replacing Representative Senti with Representative Martwick. And with that, the clerk shall call the roll.
Neckritz. Zaleski. Morrison. Ammons. Drury. Ives. Jessel. Poe. And Martwick.
Nine members having answered the roll, we have a quorum. We have one item to be voted on today. Representative Zaleski, did you want to present from your chair?
Yes, Madam Chair, if I could have permission.
You certainly do. And the bill number is?
437, I think.
Yes.
I'm not very good with this little. Okay, so proceed on Senate Bill 437.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. The bill simply simplifies the process for a pension fund to hire an emerging investment manager at the discretion of the pension fund. The bill allows a pension fund to contract with an emerging investment manager with an existing relationship with the fund without conducting a RFP. I'd ask for an aye vote, and I have former representative and esteemed member of this august body, Bob Malero, here to answer any questions.
The only witness slip I have is from Bob Malaro with the Chicago Municipal Pension Fund. Are there any questions from members? Representative Drury?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike, this is for you or for the witness. I'm just, can someone give some background as to why we're going to implement this legislation, which seems to be an exception to the procurement process for hiring a fund manager? I'm just a little bit concerned about doing that.
Yes, I can understand that. I will be as brief as I can. What
Good
when
luck.
you start
Can you state your
yeah,
name?
thank you. Did you just say good luck, Madam Chairman? But
I know you too well. And can you just state your name for the record?
But this time I
Representative?
will, because I know you have some important stuff after this. Basically, what happens is as we try to reach our goals to get as many emerging growth, whether they be women-owned or black-owned or Hispanic or Asian, as we go out there, most funds, and all this is most of the pension funds in Illinois, we have our rules and our guidelines as to who we can hire. Sometimes we put up our guidelines that you have to be out 5 years, you have to have $300 million under management, you have to reach certain goals. So it's very difficult for us to go out and hire emerging growth managers because they don't meet those requirements. So what a lot of funds do, we go under a manager of managers program, which is simply where we'd go to somebody like a Mesro or some major firm, Wells Fargo, and we would give them $200 million, and we would say, go hire 5 emerging growth managers, and if my arithmetic right, that would mean you'd give each one of them $40 million. So they would go out and hire these emerging growth managers. Now, these emerging growth managers, under the manager of managers, appear in front of our fund every month or 2 months to say how they're doing, what they're meeting, what their obligations are, and they stay with us for a period of anywhere from 2 to 3 years. And this is a lot of the pension funds do this. After 2 or 3 years, if they meet the bogey, and now they've been running our money, they have the money of the fund for the last 3 years, but they get paid through Mesro, not directly through us. So after 3 years of having a relationship, and they've been in front of our fund many, many times, and we're paying them and they're running our money, now they've been out the 3 or 4 years, or they have $200 or $300 million under management. So we want to add an additional $50 million to their already existing 40, and we want to give it to them on their own. So we wind up saying, you know, here's another $50 million that gets you to $90 or $100 million, and now you come out from under manager of managers and work for us. So one of the reasons that we feel this is necessary, if we don't do that, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you we've done it and we may be violating law when the lawyers took a look at this. If we don't do that, then what we have to do is go through the RFP process. And our RFP process is a lengthy one where we have to bring in at least 20 people. We have to have them appear before us. And we're going to do this and make these firms come from New York and California, knowing full well we're going to hire this firm that's been working for us. Everybody's going to be wasting their time and money and resources when we know we're going to hire the firm that's graduated from manager of managers. So because we've had the 2 or 3 year relationship with them, and because they've already have 40 or $50 million with us, we feel that this exception makes a world of sense.
But so let's not use the emerging managers example, but let's use Mesero or one of the big companies. When their contract is up, even if we have been happy with them, are we just allowed to rehire them? Or do we, when a Mesero contract is up, if they're managing a pension systems funds, does that go back out for bid when the contract's up, or are we just allowed to use them again because we like them?
Well, usually, if you hire most investment advisors that work for these funds, they're usually not on a contract term. They're just hired, here's their fees, and they run money until you either fire them or give them more money. It's not, I don't think we renew their contracts every year.
Scott, to answer your question, the language itself says contracts with an emerging investment manager that has invested assets of the fund already. So I don't know that the manager even comes into play here within the language of the law.
Oh, that was it.
Right.
And I don't think Mesero would be covered under the law,
no,
because
but
they're
what
not
I'm-
an emerging manager.
No, and my question isn't geared to, something that the witness was saying is that why go through the procurement process or the RFP process if we know who we're going to hire ahead of time? And I'm saying, is that what we do even for the large investment managers? Do we just skip the RFP process if we know that we like somebody?
Well, normally if they're working for us already, so if we got a company like Mesero, say forget this manager of managers, we give them $100 million. If we want to give them another $100 million, we don't have to go through an RFP. It's only if they've never done any work for us before and we're going to hire them do we have to go through an RFP. And that's the point. These people have been working for us for the past 3 years, and they've had our money for the past 3 years. So we equate it to just giving them extra money.
Thank you.
Representative Ives?
I guess the base question here is, are they or are they not exempt right now from the RFP process? Are the people that you are arguing for giving them the ability to be considered an emerging manager and giving them additional funds, are they or are they not exempt from the current RFP process?
Well, I'm not trying to be snide. That's the open legal question.
Well, that's an important question.
But that's hard to decipher because just as I was speaking earlier, I don't know, there are attorneys in here. In other words, they're working for us under a manager of managers. So Mesero, we go out, and to hire the manager of managers, we do an RFP, and we pick Mesero. Then we give them the money to give to these emerging growth managers. So these emerging growth managers are working for us and do have funds. So can we then just give them an additional $50 million on their own because they have, in a way, been working for us? So some people on our board think yes, and some people don't. So I said, why don't we just clarify it here in the General Assembly that it would allow us to give them money because they already have a relationship with us.
So the money's not flowing through Mesero, for example. It's flowing, the additional $50 million is flowing directly to that emerging manager.
That's correct. That's correct.
And I would argue then that it is subject to an RFP process as if you were hiring a brand-new manager. So I would say they are.
And that's what one of our attorneys said. Yeah, I'm not arguing with you. I'm saying you could read it and look at it that way.
Okay,
And
can I get you on record telling me right now that you're saying that folks managing $200 to $300 million are emerging managers?
No, I won't say that.
Okay, but that's what we're here talking about, people that are already well-qualified, managing hundreds of millions of dollars, you're calling now an emerging manager. At what point
Hundreds of millions.
do they not become an emerging manager? You just use
It's
that
in
as your
sta-
description.
It's in statute as to how much money you can have under management, and how many years you could be in existence before you go from emerging growth manager. It can no longer be considered that. I think
I
that's
would not-
state law now.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what it is, but it's very difficult, as I said before, when we're asking for emerging growth managers to be out 2 years and have 100 million under management before we can hire them, that eliminates a lot of possible emerging growth managers. And I think it's 5 years.
Emerging investment advisors, according to us, it looks like it's anywhere from 10 million, but less than $10 billion. Those are
Now?
still emerging advisors? $10 billion and you're still an emerging advisor. I don't think anybody in this room believes that, or that they can't go through an RFP process having managed that amount of money by themselves, or that it's cumbersome, which is my next question to you. Are you asking us to circumvent RFP process because, in your words, it's cumbersome?
I mentioned it as one of the factors. The biggest factor is they're already running money for us, and we're just giving them additional
And
money.
I think they should go through the RFP process. Thank you.
So, Mr. Morlaro, is there, when these, are they excluded from the manager of managers part of the portfolio once they get to be this larger size?
Yes, once they would graduate from the manager of managers program, for want of another term, and so therefore we would give them their own amount of money in their own name to run for us, yes.
And at some point, is there a limit on how much additional money you could give them to invest before they would have to go through an RFP process?
I'm assuming there probably wouldn't be, because once you've been hired and you're running money for us and you're already part of the system, then I don't think you have to go through an RFP process. At least that would be my thinking.
Okay. And I didn't hear the answer to Representative Drury's question. If we had somebody who's not part of this program who then is investing for you, do they ever go back through an RFP once they're hired?
I would think not. I'll have to double check, but I think once they're working for, I think all the funds do that, if they have a manager that's working for them, forget emerging or manager of managers, they just go out and hire someone, and they're hiring $300, $500 million, and they're a large cap growth or a small cap, and they're out there and they're meeting their bogey. I just keep thinking they keep working for them. Their consultant comes in and it grades all their managers, and if they're in the top third, then they just keep working. As a matter of fact, they probably get more money from the fund because they're doing so well, because they're beating the bogey. I don't think then you would say, hold it, there's a point in time where you have to go through an additional RFP. I just think you keep working for them. At least that's my understanding.
And do you, and what is the situation in which you then would go out for an RFP? You would have, so that you would be unhappy with one of your current investors or managers? And
Yeah, or there might be an asset allocation problem. So now you would have, your consultant tells you have $200 million that you have to put into a small cap. So we would go out and do an RFP with small cap managers. Everybody, we'd put it on the websites and on the board, and they would come in, and our consultant would go through about maybe 50 that would answer, cull it down to 10, bring 10 in, we'd interview them, and then eventually the consultant would say, hire one of these three, and we'd hire them and give them the $200 million. Where we run into problems with these, and we'll check to see about emerging growth up to $1 billion, but we find that there's many of these smaller groups that are the true emerging managers, if you will, Representative, whatever that may mean. $1 billion is pretty high to me, but the true emerging managers that have 20 or 30 million under management, only been out 2 years, well, we couldn't consider them regularly, so that's why we go through the manager of managers program. Now it's 2 years later, they meet all those criteria now, they meet the bogey, and because they've been working for us, we call it a graduation and give them money to run for us or invest for us.
Okay, so really, the only time you go back through an RFP process is when you need to adjust your
Yeah, and we fire,
asset allocation.
yeah, and we fire managers all the time because they're haven't reached their bogey, and then it's, a year later, they still haven't. After 1 or 2 seasons like that, then they're gone.
Okay,
They're fired. And then we have to go through the RFP process to hire somebody new.
okay, very good. I have a letter from Speaker Madigan replacing Representative Drury with Representative Walsh. Representative Walsh is here. Are there any other questions?
Can I just add?
Representative Jessiel, did you want to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might have been asked and answered already, but just to clarify, it says here that the emerging investment advisor is a minority-owned business, a female-owned business, or a business owned by a person with disabilities, correct? I mean,
Yes.
that's one of the
Yes.
qualifications. So if you weren't one of these things, would you be required to complete an RFP process if you were part of this program and the Manager of Managers program, or are these the only ones that can be part of the Manager of Managers program?
Those would be the only ones that are part of a Manager of Managers program. We hire a Manager of Managers to go out and seek these emerging growth, what you just mentioned, the definition, because they don't have a lot of money under management, we couldn't hire them, so we have a Manager of Managers. We do not have Manager of Manager program that I know anywhere in Illinois that is hired by pension funds to deal with any other group except emerging growth. And I know for the city of Chicago, it's strictly emerging growth managers.
Okay, so if you don't qualify, you would be subject to the RFP process. I think
Well,
I followed up on.
we couldn't hire you even if you went through the RFP process. If you don't have enough money under management, you haven't been out there running money for at least a certain amount of years, we could not hire you. That's why we go through the Manager of
Okay,
Managers.
so the amount of money that you're managing is the key here, or is it some of
Both.
these other criteria?
Both.
I guess I'm just still confused about that.
I'm not sure what you're asking, but the reason is there may be some woman-owned firm that were started 2 years ago and have 25 million under management. We come in and say, we'd love to do that woman-owned firm, they got great numbers, but our criteria says you have to be out at least 3 years and you have to have $50 million under management or we can't hire you. So we can't hire the firm. And that's happened so many times that we went to a Manager of Managers program where we go to Mesro and say, here's $200 million, because they've been around for 100 years, right? They have enough under management. Go hire some emerging growth managers that wouldn't otherwise qualify for us and give them our money to invest. So that's what we've done. And they go through an RFP, the Mesro does. But then when Mesro gives the money, so after 3 years, this firm that I said didn't have enough years and didn't have enough money under management, now it's 3 years later, and they do have enough years, and they do have enough money under management. And they've reached their bogey every year. So we'd like to take that woman-owned firm and make it part of our portfolio and give them an extra 40 million or 50 million, and they now invest money for us as a manager, as a regular manager.
Okay.
And we'd rather not go through an RFP and have to do that. We look at it as though we're just giving them more money because they've already been running it for us. So that's how
Okay.
we look at it.
So just to follow up, one last question. So if you were a couple of college kids, young men that just got out of college and wanted to start their own investment firm and were working toward this, they would not be eligible at all for your program, correct?
We wouldn't be able to hire them direct, that's correct.
Right. Could they be part of your Manager of Managers program?
Yeah, there's some criteria to that too. I'm not sure exactly what that is. There's some criteria. I don't know if you could just come out of college and do it, but
Can I
there's some criteria.
interject on that?
Thank you.
Yeah, Sherry, these couple of misconceptions here over the last 15 minutes have sort of evolved. You can't be a couple of college kids and decide to be a manager of manager in massive municipal pension funds. So I mean, maybe you can. I can't envision a scenario where anyone would want to hire you to do that. The second and third thing, and I know Madam Chair wants to get on with this, but I understand the sensitivity to avoiding RFP processes and being in the interest of transparency. But if you vote no on this bill, you're doing two things. You're forcing these funds, which we all know are already under an enormous amount of stress, to go out to an RFP process, when as the General Assembly, we can make it easier for them to trust the money to the people they've already entrusted the money to, and you're inviting out-of-state companies to come in and do work when Illinois companies have the right to do the work first. So I understand the sensitivity to being averse to the RFP process, but there's unintended consequences to sometimes voting no in the interest of what's considered to be good government procurement law. So I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Representative Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bob, there's a Senate Bill 1334 and a House Amendment 1 that is floating around there that would actually raise the threshold up to $20 billion. Were you aware of that?
No, I was told that about a half hour ago by one of the representatives, said, does this have anything to do with that? It doesn't, but no, I haven't seen that bill.
Well, if this bill passes out of committee and passes on the floor, then it would be a relevant issue.
Well, it's relevant under the terms of what defines an emerging growth manager, yes. But it's not relevant as to what we're trying to do, and that is someone who's been investing money for our fund for the last 3 years, and someone who couldn't, at the time, could not be part of the fund. So in other words, if you already have $300 million and you've already been out 3 years, then you wouldn't have to go under the emerging growth. We could hire you ourselves. You wouldn't have to do manager of managers. The only reason we do managers of managers is because it opens it up for so many of these firms that normally can't come to work for us. Because there's a lot of women-owned firms and black-owned firms, Hispanic-owned firms that are just relatively new. They may have had people who worked for Mesro and Wells Fargo, but they went and started their own firm. Mm-hmm. So even if that bill passes you're talking about, we still couldn't hire these new firms because they haven't been out long enough. Now, whether the General Assembly wants to raise emerging growth or not, I'm not here to argue that. I'm not saying they should or they shouldn't. So I don't know the status of that bill or where it's going, but this really was not written with that bill in mind or not in mind.
All right. I think just some of our concerns are that we want to see a competitive RFP, and this removes a lot of the competition for that.
Yeah, I don't see it that way, but I can understand your thoughts. I certainly understand where you're coming from.
Representative Ammons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make one comment. Initially, when I saw this, I was a little bit skeptical about it, concerned about the, certainly it intends to make accessible opportunities for women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and I hope that indeed it does, because I will support it, but I just had been texting a friend of mine. I mentioned to our expert witness here outside that he is a part of the Managers of Managers program, and he's been involved for 15 years with that program. And so under this Senate bill, he would in essence be able to step out from underneath that program and increase his portfolio by doing direct.
Right. If he meets certain bogeys within that. Okay. I want to say, if he's been there 15 years, that means he's probably middle of the road. Not doing a nice job. I don't want to say anything bad about that manager. Yeah, but if he reached certain, threshold, and he still has to have it where if it's 15 years or 200 million under management, during that time as a manager of managers program, as a sub-manager, he still, or she has to go out and get, more money under management. Otherwise, we still can't let him graduate. They still have, there's a amount of years, amount of money they would have to have before we can hire them.
I appreciate it. I would love to, as we move forward with this, if it passes, I would like for us to review it and see the actual impact on those firms, maybe in another year or so. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, Representative Ammons moves to pass on Senate Bill 437. The clerk shall call the roll.
Neckrutz.
Aye.
Zaleski. Morrison.
No.
Ammons. Ives. Jezel. Poe. Martwick. Walsh.
On a vote of 5 voting yes, 4 voting no, Senate Bill 437 shall be favorably reported to the floor. So
Thank you, Madam Chair.
that's the end of our consideration of bills. We will now move to the subject matter hearing portion of the meeting today. The Governor Rauner has publicly talked about a pension proposal, and in the interest of moving, since it's May 13th and we don't have a whole lot of time left in the legislative session, we thought it might be useful to hear from the governor's people about that proposal and start getting educated on it. So with that, I'd like to welcome Kim Fowler and Mike Mahoney to their new roles, sitting at the desk, answering questions after being the ones prodding those of us who are asking the questions to ask those questions. So welcome. Delighted to see you both, and whenever you're ready, go ahead.
I would like to thank Chairman Nekritz for calling this important meeting of my favorite House committee to discuss the governor's pension reform proposal and also the dire situation in public pension plans across the state of Illinois. I will not belabor the point, I'm sure you're all aware, but the fiscal conditions of our pension systems are putting a strain not only on our state, but many of our municipalities as well. Just yesterday, the city of Chicago had its credit rating downgraded to speculative status by Moody's, based mostly on pension liabilities. For the 5 state pension systems, the state will owe $7.6 billion in FY16. That's if no changes are made. That's around 25% of our operating budget. And over the next 30 years, if, and this is a big if, actuarial assumptions hold true, the state will spend $356 billion to get our pension debt 90% funded. In short, the current system has become broken. In February, the governor brought forth a plan to help deal with the fiscal problems the state is facing today and also reduce the long-term costs in a way that is fair to both taxpayers and public employees. The plan had no impact on those who are already retired and also protected benefits that have already been earned by current members. I will walk you through the plan in some detail, and then I'll hand it over to Kim Fowler, who will talk about the governor's constitutional amendment that he's also proposing. So with our benefit reform plan, we would be looking at the 4 state systems that we targeted in Senate Bill 1, state employees, state universities, teachers' retirement system, and also the General Assembly system. And what you're looking at would be a freeze of benefits on July 1, 2015 for Tier 1 members. For all future service would be in the Tier 2 plan that the General Assembly passed in March of 2010 that went into effect January 1 of 2011 for newly hired employees. The benefits for Tier 2, I'm sure you're all aware, but normal retirement age moves up to 67 with an early retirement age at 62, and annuities based on the highest 8 years out of the last 10 years of service. The final average salary shall not exceed a cap based on Social Security wage cap growing at half of CPI, and COLAs begin at the later anniversary of the first year of retirement or at age 67 and are the lesser of 3% or 1/2 the annual increase in CPI not compounded. We also had some other additions to that, including future overtime will not count towards pensionable salary. For TRS and SURS, there's a 6% cap on final average salary, and if it is above 6% increase, then the local employer has to pay the pensionable costs. We'd be looking to lower that to CPI for the previous year. Also, in the money purchase plan in TRS and SURS, we'd be looking to lower that to the U.S. Treasury rates going forward. We also have in there, it would be new for public employees, or public pension plans, I should say, a buyout option. So employees in the state pension plans who have their Tier 1 service frozen would have the option of taking a partial pension buyout that would allow them to lower their Tier 1 COLA on their Tier 1 benefit to the Tier 2 COLA on their Tier 1 benefit. And in exchange for that reduction, they would receive a lump sum payment into a defined contribution plan, and then the defined contribution plan would also be a supplemental benefit package on top of their Tier 2 plan going forward. We made a couple changes to the funding schedule. Current funding plan calls for 90% funded by 2045. We moved to 100% funded by 2045, and also we smooth the investment return and assumption changes that our systems provide us with over a 5-year period, much like we smooth our investment returns over a 5-year period. And with that, I will hand it off to Kim, who will talk about the constitutional amendment.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'd like to address the governor's proposal for amending the Constitution on pensions, and also under the current Constitution, what we believe is the constitutionality of the governor's proposal. We continue to believe that the governor's proposal that Mike outlined is constitutional under the current Constitution, even after the Supreme Court's ruling that came out Friday on Senate Bill 1. In the Senate Bill 1 case, as the court said, the state acknowledged that the reforms in that bill impaired benefits, including changing the benefits of retirees. But then the state argued that even though benefits were impaired, it could do so under its police powers, its sovereign powers, that these reforms were needed to right the fiscal ship due to the fiscal crisis we've been under. The governor has maintained all along, before and after this case, that his proposal should survive a constitutional challenge, even if Senate Bill 1 is thrown out. It was thrown out. His proposal is a whole different approach. The proposal that Mike just outlined protects earned benefits. Anything, any benefits due to work that's already been performed, you would keep that. You would keep, for example, if you'd worked for 20 years, you would get a benefit based on the current Tier 1 formula. You'd get 3% compounded for 20 years worth of benefits. But going forward, benefits you have not yet earned could be under the different formula. So under that structure, there's no change in benefits to retirees, just for future service. And so our viewpoint of this is that benefits are not impaired, that only earned benefits are protected under the Constitution. They're not retroactive like Senate Bill 1 was. We are not relying on the police powers defense. We don't think, there's any need to, because we would say the benefits have not been impaired. And reading that opinion, Governor's Council is confident that that opinion does not squarely address our approach, the earned benefits approach. There was not a ruling on that. There have been some lower court decisions, a prior Illinois Supreme Court decision that talked about earned benefits, but that was not addressed on point in Friday's decision. In terms of relying on the savings, I know there's been a lot of discussion on that. We have been very conservative in the savings proposed to be reflected in the budget, but with this legal structure that we're under, we do not believe that these reforms, if enacted by the General Assembly, should be enjoined. We would not meet the standards for an injunction. We would not reduce protected benefits, so we would have a likelihood of success on the merits. In terms of irreparable harm, there was some I think, pretty serious potential harm in Senate Bill 1. You had people that were retiring, and that's an irrevocable decision. You can't come back and say, give me a couple more years. You had cuts in employee contributions, very difficult to get that money back, a long administrative time needed. We don't have any of those conditions in this proposal, and in fact, we would allow continued bargaining of pensions, which Senate Bill did not on those reforms. So that's our approach constitutionally on this proposal, but I think that brings up the issue exactly what benefits are protected under the Constitution. We think there is some ambiguity there that's, I think, evidenced by the opinion Friday, all the different readings, lots of lawyers have lots of different opinions on it. We've had all the competing proposals with different approaches. So we feel it would be best for the state and set the state up to make constitutionally sound reforms. If we amended the Constitution, we would simply make it clear that benefits, right now it just says benefits shall not be diminished or impaired, say that those are earned benefits. So we add the word earned and then a simple explanation of the earned benefits that's for work already performed. Benefits would be calculated according to the formula in effect during that period of service, and that the General Assembly by law may alter the formula to calculate the pension based on service not yet completed. So going forward, any service after the date of enactment, after it's upheld, could be under a different formula. We would urge the General Assembly to vote this spring to put this on the ballot in November 16th, November 2016. We think it's important to for the future of the state to be able to get pension reforms that would be upheld by the court. As Mike said, we have a tremendous burden now on our state budget, almost a quarter of the budget, and then you've got pension bond payments on top of that. And that doesn't leave room for what the governor and I'm sure all of you want to do in terms of education, healthcare, human services, all the things that we need to be doing. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Representative Drury.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just so I understand, is the governor still planning on doing a legislative proposal this session as well as a constitutional amendment?
This is the governor's legislative proposal. As many people are aware, we are working with the 4 caucuses and are open to other ideas right now, but we're looking towards the future, and I think the constitutional amendment's a good way to go about doing that, but we also think we need to do something to immediately address the issue we face.
Okay, and so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Have both of you actually read the 38-page opinion from the Supreme Court?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so reading that opinion, there was a lot of comments that there's some ambiguity, there's a lot of different opinions. The opinion was a 7-0 opinion by the Supreme Court, wasn't it?
Yes,
Okay.
you're correct.
And so, and the provision that's at stake that was interpreted by the court, and I thought when I voted for the pension reform that it was important to get this issue to the court so that we could get some guidance from them on what this provision means. The provision is pretty simple. Membership in any pension or retirement system of the state, any unit of local government or school district, or any agency or instrumentality thereof shall be an enforceable contractual relationship, the benefits of which shall not be diminished or impaired. So they interpreted that clause in this 38-page opinion, right? And so for me, the question was, when does the contractual relationship start? Because, right, it clearly says it's an enforceable contractual relationship, the benefits of which shall not be diminished or impaired. And would you agree that the Supreme Court clearly answered that question in this 38-page opinion?
Well, we don't think the court clearly answered what benefits are protected. Is it benefits from when you become a member of the system, a lifetime contract, you're locked into what was in effect on day one. If it's changed on your 10th year, you get the improvement. And that's our approach would be that benefits should be limited, the protection is limited to just what's been earned, what you've already worked for. And going forward, just like any job, you're not entitled to the job for life, you're not entitled to a level of salary or duties, nor should you be entitled to a lifetime set of benefits.
Okay, and that was a question that I had back in December of 2013 when I voted to move this issue out of the General Assembly and into the court system so that we would be in this position now with the hope that if the court gave us a roadmap, that we would actually take that to heart and follow the roadmap. And so this is what the court said on that question. I'm reading on pages 19 and 20. The court says, the protections afforded to such benefits by Article 13, Section 5, attach once an individual first embarks upon employment in a position covered by a public retirement system, not when the employee ultimately retires. And it cites some case law. And then the court goes on to hold, accordingly, once an individual begins work and becomes a member of a public retirement system, any subsequent changes to the pension code that would diminish the benefits conferred by membership in the retirement system cannot be applied to that individual. Wouldn't you, that language is pretty clear that the relationship starts when the employee is hired. Do you agree with that?
Yes, when you enter service through the time of your work service. But I think what's not clear there is what benefits cannot be changed. Is it, and we would view it as you cannot change the benefits for past work, but going forward, that's something that should be able to change. And we feel, like you said, this is a roadmap. We think a path that can be taken is the governor's proposal, but we are open to other paths. I think people look at the footnote on that page about additional benefits can be conferred in exchange for consideration or other contributions. We feel like that gives a path forward with some proposals. This is such an important issue fiscally for the state. We need to keep trying. We need to find a way, to get the state back on track.
And I agree with that, and I appreciate it, and I would like to be part of that solution. But the court was eminently clear, at least from my perspective, reading this opinion several times, that once the employee locks into employment, that the benefits that that employee locked into on the date of employment can't be diminished. Sure, in a footnote it says it can be increased. It says it may always be, benefits may always be added, of course, but it then says these benefits can't be diminished or eliminated. So we can increase the benefits, which we've done. With the COLA was one of those that we did in the 90s. But once we do that, we can't take it away. And so I think that if we all agree that this is a critical moment in Illinois history, we now have the roadmap from the Supreme Court. They were angry with the legislation. I would say the tone was an angry opinion that we were only diminishing retirees' benefits. We weren't taking benefits away from creditors. We weren't saying, well, we're not going to pay your bills, we're actually going to pay them with interest. The court poked a lot of holes in what we did. And so if we are going to have any credibility with the public and with the courts, then we have to really look at this and not just say, well, there was a plan proposed earlier as part of some turnaround, and we're going to stick with it. I think that that needs to be set aside because it's just not realistic anymore, and we need to move forward and look at a plan that achieves our goals of getting Illinois out of this mess, but does it in a way that we all can agree complies with this holding. The holding is not nearly as ambiguous as you're making it out to be, and that's why I highlighted that language. It's pretty simple. And to pretend that it's not, we can have a very long hearing here today and talk about all of the problems, but the court was very clear about what we can and cannot do. I am happy to be part of that conversation, but it seems to me that it is a non-starter to pretend that this 38-page opinion doesn't exist out of an issue of pride. I'm sure that the governor's office is proud of the proposal, but that proposal isn't realistic anymore in light of what the court did. And so I hope that we can move forward with a new plan. I don't know what the plan would be, that is going to get us out of this. And I think that your constitutional amendment that wants to add the word earned benefits into there is an acknowledgement of the fact that you understand that what you're trying to propose legislatively probably doesn't work. And so your two proposals actually counterbalance each other, set your proposals apart. And so I hope that we can use a subject matter hearing to try to come forth with a real solution, not a solution that's already been disregarded and discarded by the Supreme Court.
Should have added Representative Drury's and sending back on the roll Representative Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the testimony and coming before this committee. I mean, this is an extremely difficult issue. It's one that we've been dealing with for many years, had too many meetings, and our pension problems are known to the world, basically. And I appreciate what we're trying to do to come to a real solution, because I don't think we can afford as a state to have so much money just going to retirement benefits. We're not going to have the money for all those other essential state functions. And one of the things that I've appreciated is being on this committee for now, this is my 5th year, and trying to interact with my constituents who write me. Probably Representative Neckrits, you've gotten more emails than I have, but I've gotten a lot. I've gotten a lot of phone calls, and the benefit of getting those in person and responding to them is you get a lot of feedback. And so I would just say, the reason why I think this proposal has some merit is because anecdotally, when I talk to constituents in my district and outside of my district, and when I explain to them that I think it is right to preserve what you've earned up to today, but moving forward we do something different, most individuals I talk to candidly will tell me that seems fair. They'll say that seems fair because they acknowledge how big the problem is. And I'm in the northwest suburbs, so most of my constituents who are in one of these 5 plans are teachers. And they entered the profession because they care about kids. They care about students. And they know that if we don't change this, fix this going forward, it's going to result in layoffs to current teachers. It's going to result in less money going to local school districts. It's going to have to. So I appreciate that you're moving forward on it. I know it's going to be difficult. I think I'd like you to explain a little bit more the amendment process and the thinking behind that, because that's something that I've advocated for. It's not just the state that has pension issues. It's, our counties and municipalities have them too. So if you could just explain the amendment process and why you think that's so important to move forward on that.
Yes, Representative, you bring up a good point. The constitutional provision applies to any unit of local government, school districts, and so an amendment to the pension protection clause would give some clarity, not just for the General Assembly, for the state systems, but for all the local systems. And as Mike said, City of Chicago just got a double downgrade, and Moody's said that it's clear that its options for dealing with its pension burdens have been narrowed by this decision. Chicago Public Schools has been struggling. Suburban downstate police and fire. There is a huge burden on property taxes and other local revenues from pensions, and if we can put some clarity in here and make it to support proposals that would protect earned benefits and change them going forward, it opens up lots of possibilities for what the new plan would be. And we wouldn't, we would still have significant liabilities we would have to pay off,
Sure.
for all those earned benefits, but it would put us in a better position going forward. And I just want to reiterate too that the governor is open to other proposals, to modifying this, to taking different approaches in the pension working group. We've tried to make that clear. He's been meeting with the leaders to get their input. So we look forward to doing something, and we just think it's so important for the future of the state to not just give up on this and devote a quarter of our budget to pensions.
Just one final thing, since this is a subject matter hearing, I just wanted to put that out there, that one part of your proposal, for some Tier 1 members are giving the option of a buyout for their 3% COLA. I think about one conversation I had with a teacher. At the time, he had taught for 27 years, and he told me all of a sudden it occurred to him that his entire retirement nest egg was in the hands of Springfield politicians. And that didn't give him a whole lot of comfort. And so he liked the idea of being able to diversify his nest egg and having some control over a part of his retirement. He liked the fact that he had a defined benefit, but he wanted to diversify. So I just thought that was an interesting comment, and I encouraged him to talk to his other colleagues about that, because I think it's an important point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Zaleski.
Kim and Mike, are either of you attorneys?
I am. I'm Chief Legal Counsel for the Governor's Office of Management and Budget.
So you said there was a opinion that the governor's office about, in light of Heaton, that they wrote an opinion that allows the governor's office to say that your plan squares with that decision. Mm-hmm. Is that accurate, Kim?
Yes.
Can you share that with the committee?
That was an internal memo. Let me check with Governor's Chief Counsel and see if we can provide you with a copy of that.
That'd be great. Or clean it up and give us what you feel is not work product.
Okay.
I won't belabor it. I'm in full agreement with Representative Drury. There's no reading of that decision that squares with your testimony here today. I'm sorry to have to say it that way, but it's clear to me, and I think others, that benefits are benefits under this law, and there's nothing we can do to alter them. I wish, as someone who worked on Senate Bill 1, I wish that weren't necessarily so, because I think we can manage. We have a huge unfunded liability, but as it exists now, we have to reconcile ourselves with this decision and move beyond this distinction between this false distinction between earned benefits and future benefits earned. It's just not realistic. So if you can offer that opinion to us, and get us some clarity. Otherwise, it's just going to prolong what is an unmanageable problem right now. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Ives?
Thank you. Just announced is CPS downgraded by Moody's. So not just Chicago, also CPS. So the problem continues to worsen. So now, I mean, nobody's arguing except for possibly Senator Cullerton that there's a crisis. I think he's the only one who doesn't believe we're in crisis mode right now. That said, I'm trying to figure out if we were to move to, and I agree, I think Rauner's pension plan, the governor's pension plan, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I'm all for it. I agree that if you show up on day one to GM, if you show up on day one to AT&T or any other private company, you know already that you're not necessarily getting the pension benefits that people got in the past. My brother, AT&T employee, he got 5 years, and then he was told you're immediately shifted to a 401k. This happens all the time. At that point, it's your decision to continue employment or to not continue employment. Your past benefit is what it is. There was actually no cutting of that. Going forward, you have a 401k. So I don't think that truly was tested in the constitutionality of the SB1 argument. I think what they did is they changed benefits for retirees, and they changed benefits for current workers as well. But the change from the retirees is what truly probably made it unconstitutional. So you would have to believe, and I'd like your opinion on this, that if I worked for state government prior to this, and then went into the private sector, and then I came back to state government, I would still be entitled for the first benefits that I received with state government, or would I now be in, let's say, Tier 2 if I had started in Tier 1? What would be your opinion?
Well, I think there's some readings of this opinion would say once you're in Tier 1, you're always in Tier 1. You leave state service, you go to work for AT&T for 5 years, you come back, you still get Tier 1. That's one reading. We would, again, on the earned benefits say if you left and came back and there was a new plan for Tier 1 going forward, you would go into the new plan.
Well, this is exactly the conversation that my neighbor had with me, who was so excited to have been picked up by Governor Rauner's administration, and his comment to me was, yes, I'm back in the pension system. Well, is he in Tier 1 or does he go to Tier 2? Is that a question that you guys have answered or asked about new hires? Has anybody gotten an opinion from the AG on which pension system he would then be a part of?
Well, current statute would provide that once you were in Tier 1 and you left and you came back, you would still have your Tier 1 status. That's what the current statute is. And our suggestion is to change those statutes going forward for people who have always been in state service and for those who came back to be under a new plan, the more affordable Tier 2 plan.
Well, there's no doubt that we need to make that change, and we need to make it immediately. How about in the case of what's really happening in North Riverside, where they basically privatized their fire department, and it saved them loads of money by offloading the pension obligation, and all those firefighters were then hired, or new ones were hired, and put into a 401k plan. I mean, is that a possibility? You basically can privatize then? Government, is that where we're headed in order to get out of the pension obligation? Or, I mean, obviously this municipality took that as their only way out from under their pension obligation.
I think that example points out what a burden, a public pension for police and fire is. The cities can opt out. You don't have to have, a publicly directed police and fire. You can privatize. And I think, there may be more cities that go that way because it is so expensive. It's such a burden on their property taxes to pay for the benefits for police and fire that are set by the General Assembly and the governor and state statute, not set by the local governments who just pay it.
Okay. Well, I find that we are in crisis. I find that it's not just at the state pension level, it's actually in the municipalities, and I feel like nobody is guaranteed what's going to happen in the future. The 95% of the state workers who work for the private sector, or not, I'm sorry, the 95% of the citizens of Illinois that work for the private sector know that they are, when they walk into their job on day one, they know that things can be changed in the future. So I think that reality needs to hit. We need to make this constitutional change, and I believe that Governor Rauner's current program that he's promoting, I think it will meet constitutional muster because you are guaranteed everything you've earned up to date. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't see any of the committee members asking questions, but I have a few. I just would like to start off by saying that I'm sitting in this committee and I just feel like it's Groundhog Day. So that being said, I do agree with reading the interpretation of the opinion that I share with Representatives Drury and Zaleski. But that being said, I want to kind of get into some of the specifics of the governor's proposal here. Can you tell me on the final average salary? So on one portion, you're 4 of your last 10, and on one portion, you're 8 of your last 10. How does that work even?
So you would have your Tier 1 benefit, you could technically view it as being siloed. Your salary would be frozen for your Tier 1 benefit upon moving into Tier 2. So your Tier 1 benefit would be based on your Tier 1 salary, final average salary calculation for Tier 1, 4 out of the last 10.
And so, and if you've worked for 8 years, it's at 4 of your last 8? Because I believe a lot of people
yes,
vest.
4 of your last 8.
Okay, got it.
And then for Tier 2, it would be 8 of your last 10, whatever was in your Tier 2 salary range.
And how does retirement age work? Do you collect your Tier 1 benefit at the retirement age of Tier 1?
Yes, so you would not be eligible for your Tier 2 retirement benefit until you hit Tier 2 retirement age, but your Tier 1 retirement benefit, you would be eligible at your current Tier 1 retirement age.
So you might keep working until you're 67, but you'd start collecting your Tier 1 benefit?
The same retirement eligibility rules would apply, so you would have to be actually retired.
And if you retired, if you retired at the age at which you were eligible to retire under Tier 1, you would take a penalty under Tier 2?
If you were to want to collect your Tier 2 benefit early.
I see. So you would just quit working and then wait?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And can you tell me a little, you were speaking rather quickly, Mr. Mahoney, so I didn't catch the money purchase plan rate. What is that, was that the same proposal we had in Tier 1, on SB1 on the money purchase plan?
You know, we moved it to the U.S. Treasury bond rates going forward.
And what was it in SB1?
It was close to that. It had floors and ceilings.
Oh, that's
It was
right.
more complicated, yeah.
Okay, great. And the buyout option, can you run through that again as well?
Sure. So if you were a Tier 1 employee, you would have the option to give up your Tier 1 COLA on your Tier 1 benefit. You would then have a Tier 2 COLA on your Tier 1 benefit, and in exchange for that, you would take a lump sum payment into a defined contribution plan. Then there would be a state match and an employee contribution into the DC plan. The DC would be a supplemental to your Tier 2 benefit.
And how is the lump sum calculated?
We would run actuarial valuations of pension benefits based on tranches of employees.
So something would be set in statute as to what that lump sum is, or is it calculated
No, it would be more of an
individually?
individual basis.
And there's language in there, the intent is for this to be revenue neutral. We have not counted on any savings in this. It's just an option. We don't know how many people would take it without all the perimeters, all the actuarial runs for that. There was no way to cost it out because there would be, a lot of variables.
And so back to the retirement question then, if you retire at the age of, at your Tier 1 eligibility, would you start getting your Tier 2 COLA then?
You would get a Tier 2 COLA on your Tier 1 benefit. So the.
So whenever you
when
decide to
your
take
same
it.
COLA eligibility rules, it's just a different COLA.
Okay. So one of the things we did in Senate Bill 1 was move from the projected unit credit to the entry age normal. Would you have thoughts on how you would want to handle that?
I would be open to talking about it. I know you did that in Senate Bill 1. We did not do it in this reform package.
Okay.
We do move to 100% funding over 30 years.
I did note that, and I'm always grateful for that goal. Smoothing, you mentioned something about smoothing the investment returns. Why is that necessary?
So we have our system set the assumed rate of return. This was done outside of the scope of the General Assembly of the Governor's Office, which then helps set the contribution rate. This last year, I think TRS dropped from 7.75 to 7.
Oh, I see. So,
And a half.
so if the systems change their expected rate of return,
Correct.
then you smooth that over a period.
I believe, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but about 450 million of our increase in contribution this year was due to decreases in rate of return
So
assumptions.
doesn't that just like make us pay more interest? I mean, it just underfunds the systems and at some point, and we just have to pay more interest.
Well, it does smooth out the payments, just like,
Well, I understand that, but
on
the
the
effect
actuarial-
is to underfund for a period of time.
yeah. We would have had just a small increase from this year to next year. I think it was initially 50 million, but due to the unilateral decision of the systems without General Assembly or gubernatorial approval, their actuaries recommended they drop those assumptions. The board approves, and then we have an almost $500 million increase due just next year. So the idea is, instead of going those peaks and valleys, to smooth that out.
I get that, but it does underfund the system for a period of time, and then, and hopefully the systems are acting in their fiduciary capacity, making those decisions on the basis of what's best for the long-term health of the system. And I think that's been a place where we've resisted stepping into determining what is the expected rate of return, because then it becomes political and not a part of their fiduciary obligation.
And I would like to add that it's a two-way street. If the systems were to increase their return assumption, we'd smooth that in over 5 years, so the benefit of the state would not be felt in year one either, much like our investment return smoothing.
I don't anticipate that road for quite some time, unfortunately. There's been all this question about whether Tier 2 meets the safe harbor provisions of Social Security. What are your thoughts on how we would handle that?
Looking into the issue, I think the pensionable salary cap in Tier 2 is what keeps coming up as maybe a potential problem down the road. In our plan, we did not change it. We kind of based it on, in Senate Bill 1, there was a pensionable salary cap that was half of CPI as well.
Not my idea.
And so we would be more than open to looking into that.
Okay. So my last question is, has there been is there any sort of actuarial analysis of this proposal yet?
We have had Deloitte run numbers originally, and we have shared those with both staffs and members here, I believe. And then we are also having the systems are currently running projections.
Okay, very good. Representative Senti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Were you done? Okay. I wanted to go back to the concept of the diminishment of services and your understanding of the ruling. So are you saying that earned would mean the last day that an employee worked before a bill would pass, for example? Or would you be considering it the last day of the current contract that was signed by both parties, or some other definition?
It would be, in our bill, we set the date of July 1st, so it's not, there's not a date certain of when someone would leave their work, but starting July 1st, all work after that date, it would be under the new system.
Because there would be a notification. So if contracts weren't expired, that would not matter to you. You would say, this is the date this bill passed. If you're working the next day, regardless if you have a contract, you've made the decision in your mind as an employee, and you're assuming that what you're earning after that will be different than it was before July 1st. Is that kind of summarizing it?
Yeah, the contracts don't set the pension benefits, the state statute does. So, I mean, I see your example in terms of salary. You know, you would still be entitled to salary or whatever other work rule conditions would be under contract, but the pension benefits being set by statute could be changed by statute.
Since I think I'm the only one here in the room who hasn't made a comment in terms of the decision in this proposal, I have been in the General Assembly for just short of 6 years, also as Representative Morrison. We came in about the same time, and I think the argument about fair or right or it fixes the problem mathematically, for me, after this ruling, while those might be interesting conversations that I had with public employees at the door, I think that is behind us, and what we need to look at going forward is what is constitutional. So, like the idea of the constitutional amendment, I think the people can speak, and I think that's a great idea, and I do think it's important to try and do something before then, because for everyone's sake, every person in Illinois' sake, some decision should be made, but I do also feel that the ruling was very clear, and I do feel that items in this proposal are not constitutional and would fall under the same, to the same ends, maybe in a slightly different way, but fall to the same ends, and I don't want to let another day go by. So as I'm racking my brain for a couple of remaining solutions that don't feel like a diminishment of benefits, I have a few in mind, and I wish that we would at least be looking at that as well. I don't serve on that pension working group. I would be happy to contribute to any working meeting or submit some ideas, but I guess to me, I do feel that that a decision has been made and we're going down the same path in a slightly different way. Respectfully, I know you've done a lot of work, and I just wanted for me to close with that.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Kim Fowler and Mike Mahoney for being here today and answering our questions and clarifying some things. Appreciate it. I'd like to call the SURS, SERS, and TRS up. I see two of the three executive directors. I know Mr. Ingram is out of town and unable to make it today, but I'd like to welcome the new SURS Executive Director, Brian Lewis, Tim Blair from SERS, and Andrew Bodavies for TRS. Do any of you gentlemen want to make any opening remarks, or do you want to respond to questions? Okay. Is there any questions from members for the systems? All right. You guys may get off pretty easy. So I just would, based on what you'd heard today, are there questions? Oh, Representative Morrison.
I guess I had a question about GARS. I know it's only 0.2%, but this is the question that comes up. What happens to the funding as it seems like every General Assembly there have been more and more people who have been opting out of GARS? Right. So how do you see that playing out? You know, right now there's over 300 active retirees in GARS. There's roughly 150 current members. It seems like that ratio is going to continually expand. So how do you see that playing out? Because right now it's only funded at like 17%.
At the last board meeting of the GA retirement system, we actually did present an assumption to the board that would have taken into account that we have seen over the last 3 election cycles, roughly 50% of the people who were new to the General Assembly opted out. So we actually did assume, given the current rate of termination, because we do have a turnover assumption, that half of the new folks coming into the General Assembly would opt out of the retirement system. So what that does is provides a kind of a declining payroll over time as far as the covered members, and it actually removed a little bit of the backloading of the funding plan, so that we had a marginal increase in the expected FY 17 and 18 contributions, just to reflect that over time we expect the actual covered payroll in the GA system to continue to decline. And ultimately, over the funding period, it actually gets down to only 70 active members.
And I just like to, we invited the system today to talk about the governor's proposal, and I don't want to cut you off, Representative Morrison. So if we've got other questions about GARS, I'm fine to entertain them. But if I just wanted to let the witnesses know that if they weren't prepared with some stuff, or if they're not prepared for those kinds of questions, that we would all understand why.
Sure. I mean, GARS is part of the governor's proposal, though.
It is. I agree. So.
All right.
So they did adopt an assumption to take that into account, that we have seen a lot more opt-outs recently.
Is that it, Representative Morrison?
Well, I don't want to use up the committee's time. I've got some other questions about GARS. I'll follow up with you later.
Representative Ives.
Thank you. What worries you the most about the future of the pensions systems?
Well, I think going forward, I know we can't just set the benefit structure aside. One of the reasons why we're in the point where we have a 17% funded GA system and a 35% funded state employees retirement system is the lack of a commitment to fund the benefits over time. And I know that's probably something that we all know has occurred. But my fear is, even if we do something that we find that's found to be constitutional on the benefit side, that the funding plan would not, a generation from now, I guess I would hope we would learn from our mistakes in the funding plan, regardless of where we end up on the benefit side. As the executive secretary, you're concerned with making the benefits payments that we are compelled to make. Basically, the funds provide the benefits that we're told to provide with the money that we're given. We are just kind of the transition point in there. So my hope is that regardless of where we end up on that there's an ongoing commitment to fund the benefits at whatever level they are, and to never miss a benefit payment. That's the concern, I think, of everybody at this table.
Just to add to that concern, as plan administrators, as we think about changes and the impact to how we provide efficient service to our members, one of the concerns that I would add to that operationally and tactically is that the thought process on implementation and date implementation and time for each of the systems here to evaluate from an actuarial basis and also come up with an operational implementation plan would be under consideration for any changes.
My colleagues expressed our views as well, specifically to the governor's plan. We have the easy job. You guys have the difficult job. You tell us what to do, and we go forward with the administration of that. So obviously, we want to make sure that we're capable of administering whatever the benefit is set at. We want to make sure that we're capable of administering that well, and oftentimes that's an issue of timing when we're talking about legislation. So as far as concerns to that, I would agree that that would be our key piece, is making sure we've got enough time. as to the long-term concerns, I agree with Tim. Since 1939, when the Illinois Teachers Retirement System was started, we haven't had very many years where we've actually gotten a full actuarial payment. And I think that's a big component of why we're at where we're at. And I think in recent time, I think the General Assembly and our governors have expressed commitment that they want to change that. So, hopefully that's the past, and we assume that it is.
So last year, just for example, TRS, last year was the actuarial payment made in full last year?
Yes, as established by Illinois law, yes.
Okay, as established by Illinois law, was the actuarial payment as established by reality made last year?
Well,
for that year, for the normal cost and everything?
The normal cost was completely funded. There were several changes in Senate Bill 1 that tried to pair Illinois practice a little bit closer to best practices actuarially. And I don't want to suggest to the committee or to anyone that we're deviating drastically or that we're not using good math. We are. But everybody does it a little bit differently. Senate Bill 1 tried to be a little more aggressive in how we're doing actuarial calculations, because just like the benefits, a lot of those aspects of the calculations are set by the state in our statute. So yes, we've been following the law. Like I said, there were some things the systems liked, changes in Senate Bill 1 that we liked that we lost. But yes, the state is following the law.
So last year for TRS, they more than doubled their rate of return, yet the unfunded liability increased $5.9 billion. Some of that due to actuarial changes, a decrease from 8% to a 7.5% rate of return. However, it's still unfunded liability increase. So long-term, does it keep you up at night that without any changes going forward, that we may come to the point where taxpayers are not willing? Isn't there an impetus that we have to do something? Isn't there an impetus we have to do something? And I don't know that it's the taxpayers providing more than 25% of GRF.
From our point of view, under current law, if we follow the current law, Teachers' Retirement System will reach 90% funded in 2045. Again, though, we don't have the hard decisions that you do. We don't have to say, what can a taxpayer afford or what can the state afford? Or that's not our job. Our job is simply to apply the math.
Sure, under current law, okay, which is a massive ramp up of additional contributions in the future. Okay. Have you looked across other states? For example, New York moved to a Tier 6. They're on to Tier 6 already in New York. Their Tier 6 benefit changes, by most accounts, saved $80 billion and was a 40% reduction in benefits from Tier 5. We're not even talking about that significant of changes in our tiers. Have you looked across other states and found where it may meet constitutional muster in the state of Illinois, changes that have been affected in other states? Have you seen any plans out there?
Well, I think on the constitutional muster side, I think the way to handle that, which does not solve the problem that we have here, is you keep adding, new tiers for the new hires. I think is what's gone on in other states for the most part. Now, there are some other states too that have less. The constitutional provision isn't necessarily as stringent, so they've been able to do some things. So I think those are really the two factors that kind of differentiate us from a lot of the other states. Is they've started off from a better position generally on the funding side. So they have been able to manage their long-term problem by applying the tiers to new hires. Or conversely, they are able to change some benefits for employees who are already in the plan, simply because they don't have a strong enough, or I shouldn't say strong enough, their pension protection or their contract clause just isn't as strong as the courts have held ours is, generally. So while, yes, we can look, I don't know that, or we have looked, that there are specifically any other things that we can take from New York or any of the other states that would help us, right here today.
just one last question. In the other states where pensions are much better funded, what is one of the biggest benefit differences that you would say you see?
I think the COLA would probably be the one of the larger areas. A lot of folks have an indexed COLA rather than a COLA that is a guaranteed rate. A lot of times what we'll see is a floor or a cap, but generally it's indexed to inflation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Poe.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a quick question and vote related to this a second ago. And I'm one of the dinosaurs was here that voted for the bill in 1995. And boy, this is on recall after what I've been through. But if I remember right, we were so front-loaded on that pension plan that it's not going to be too many more years. About all that money's to be going to principal. And that's how we're going to get, and he alluded, if we don't do nothing, we're going to get to 90% in 45. And so, you guys got comments on that? That a lot of things, like you said, it's not going to make a lot of difference. If we stayed on that ramp, and it's kicking in hard now, that we could come out of this, but it's the patience of getting to that ramp.
Generally, we're at the top. We're at the level percent of payroll. I think one of the issues that we've had to kind of grapple with the fund level is with the financial markets and the differences in the outlook there, or the expectations for, the capital markets to provide a higher return. That as we've actually gotten to the point where we're on the level percent, where we've had to take a long, hard look at the request or the requirement of the state actuary, that we take a long, hard look at our investment assumptions, whereas up to 3 years ago, the boards and working with the actuaries were pretty independent as far as the assumptions that we used. We had the statutory funding plan, we had the cost allocation methodology in statute, all those good things, but we were able to set the assumptions. When the state actuary was brought in 3 years ago, one of the consistent and ongoing recommendations is to take a almost continuous look at the investment return assumption. And in fact, in the report that came out in January, the state actuary actually suggested to us that we lower our return assumption to 7.25%. So that was something that actually came from a recommendation from the state actuary. The boards, I can assure you that our board was not looking around to try to figure out how we could certify an additional $300 million in FY16. They were merely responding to the state actuary's report that basically said, we suggested that you look at this last year, and you did, but you didn't change anything. So this year we're going to suggest you just drop it to 7.25. That same recommendation was for, I believe, SURS, right. And I don't know that they specifically had a number for teachers, but they suggested lowering the assumption. So we've actually, based on our actuaries' work being reviewed by the state actuary, who actually does report and is a contractor of the Auditor General, specifically requested that we do that. So while we know that did not help the cash flow situation, the already dire cash flow situation in FY16, it was something that basically that this body, the General Assembly and Governor, created 3 years ago to specifically do what we did this January, which was lower the investment return assumption to about the most conservative rate that could be considered reasonable.
Representative Morrison.
Thank you. What do you happen to know under current law with current assumptions? Do each one of you happen to know what the cumulative employer contribution is going to be from now till 2045, or can I have the most up-to-date graph that would show that?
It's, Representative, it's something I can get for you very quickly. It's not something I have up here with me right now, but
okay.
I can give, this afternoon, I can get to everyone on the committee that information.
I won't put you on the spot, but that would be helpful to have the most up-to-date figures. Thank you.
Sure.
So I just have a few questions. So one of the things I've heard since the governor put forth his proposal is that, of transitioning all the Tier 1 employees into Tier 2, is that, that there is the potential for a mid-career employee to get a lower benefit than if they had just been enrolled in Tier 2 from the start and been in Tier 2 through the end. Can someone run through that scenario for me?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to start by saying that this is with our actuaries now. They're doing a full study of the bill. I think one of the things that you highlight is, and it's an important thing as we understand the governor's proposal, is that different people will be affected differently. One of the things, and Tim always wins this contest, but one of the things that you have to understand about all of our funds is that
He didn't look like he knew he was participating in a contest. So.
We all have very old populations, and that's the contest you win, yes. Director. But so one of the things is what will happen. You know, a lot of folks may just leave. We may see our demographics change because folks that can leave may say, well, I don't want to participate at Tier 2, I'll just go. Or that may not be the case. Folks may like their paycheck, and folks that are close to the end of their career, they may say, well, going into Tier 2 for a couple of years, it's not really going to change what I was expecting to get, and that's fine. You know, it's a minimal reduction, and that's fine. We won't know that until after the law. The flip side of that is folks that have been in for 6 months, they may not be all that affected. You know, they may have narrowly escaped, well, you wouldn't have 6 months because of the time of Tier 2, but, you know, a few years. They actually, you know, may or may not be more or less affected. It's hard to know until we have that actuary. But the concern I think that you're highlighting is what is the value of freezing the property or the salary at the Tier 1 level. So under the draft, as I was understanding the description earlier by the governor's office, is that we would basically freeze the Tier 1 salary. And freezing that salary has a very strong effect. And my guess is when we do see the savings numbers associated with that, what the actuary is producing, that will be a big component of it. The concern might be for a middle career person, someone who's got, say, 15 years in and is, based on current actuarial studies, going to work another 15 years, and you know, for 50-year-old who's been teaching for 15 years. Because that salary freezes, it's not an end-of-career salary. They've got 15 more years that they're going to get their master's in, become a principal, do whatever, and get those salary increases. And in that particular case, because that salary won't count for that half of their benefit, they would likely have been better off had they started in Tier 2. For a person like that, the big effect is that freezing of salary. So I think that's what you're getting to, and that's possible.
Okay. Because I had said that to some folks, and I was, and because I had been hearing that, and I was scoffed at, I think would be a appropriate way of describing it. So
I can't imagine
so
that.
I wanted to make sure I understand that better, Andrew, and I appreciate that. So the couple of you mentioned the implementation of a proposal like this. How long would it take for the systems to put this into effect? And, you know, I mean, is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 3 weeks? Just some round numbers.
I would think that at least 6 months, simply because some of the changes in here are fairly significant programmatically. You're going to have two separate benefit structures basically living in the same person. Now, is it impossible? No, but there are a lot of things to think about. And when you're talking about the numbers of people, you know, these are all, you know, IT programs and things. There's going to be some fairly significant changes made to those, and you want them to be right. So I would say 6 months would probably be a minimum. I hesitate to say a year. That I don't think we would need that time, and ultimately, you know, we'd get done whatever we needed to do. But 6 months would kind of be the minimum comfort zone I think I would have as an administrator trying to put all of these changes into our systems. You got to keep in mind, not only do we process benefits, but, you know, we have annual statements and various calculators. There are all kinds of things that are basically very interconnected.
Mr. Lewis, did you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I share those sentiments, and as I think about the SERS population and our members not being covered by Social Security, I think there are some additional questions and analysis that would need to take place after any proposed changes, as I think the esteemed body here has raised the question, do Tier 2 benefits meet the safe harbor provisions? Based on the early analysis from our actuary and others in the industry, that is an individual by individual analysis that would need to take place. So that's just another consideration that SERS would have to take into the calculation of any change in any implementation.
And Mr. Bodavies, I saw you shaking your head pretty affirmatively as Mr. Blair was speaking.
6 months to a year, I think, is a good time frame. There's one little piece in this that's a little different, and that's a little different specifically for my system. I got 1,000 employers. I got to go out there. I got to get all of that payroll data, right? Because if we're going to freeze a salary, we need to know what it is at whatever specific time. I've got to get it from them. Then I got to go back. I've got to audit it. I've got to check it. I got to make sure it's right. Also, I think all of our systems, we build all our own software programming. You know, you can't buy this. You can't call Microsoft and get the Tier 2 package add-on, unfortunately. So, I mean, that right there takes 6 months to build that software. So, I mean, as a minimum, I'd say 6 months because of the complexities, some of the complexities that are in here. I think 9 months would be a more comfortable minimum for me.
And so I'm going to, Mr. Lister, just to follow up on the question you had about the safe harbor. Are there, and I don't quite know how to ask this question, but are there things in the proposal that are not clear and that can have an impact on the way you that you do your actuarial analysis? And I just trying to figure out if there's questions that you have that we need to get addressed, that we as a body should be thinking about, or that the governor's office should be providing some more specifics on, as to how you would analyze this.
Well, as we're just digesting all of this information as it comes down in the last few days, we will go to our actuaries to get an understanding of the impact. And so this is still very fresh, but there will be considerations. We've been working with our actuaries to think about any potential changes in impact, but at this time, it's still very early for us to give you any feedback.
Anyone else?
Well, regarding the safe harbor, most of our folks are already covered by Social Security, but as far as the provisions that may feed into causing problems for some of the other systems, I mean, it's basically just kind of a Tier 2 overlay for future service. So I think we may have the same, problems with the Tier 1 group. If there are safe harbor issues, I think it'll probably be a problem for both groups. But again, we don't know that yet.
And would you feel the same way as Mr. Lewis does, that it's still a little early in the process for you to have quite that specific questions?
I don't have any. It'll be interesting to see what the results actually are, because I don't really. This is, this whole change going forward is a little bit is kind of different than the Senate President's proposal from a couple of years ago. But it's just tough to back of the envelope these things.
Anything to add, Mr. Davies? Okay. So my last question is, how long do you anticipate an actuarial analysis will take?
I believe we can probably have something. I'm not sure that my actuaries would want me to say this, but they may ruin their entire weekend. But I would guess that we would have something within the next week or so, depending on. Now that's me speaking for them. We don't necessarily have an ETA yet, at least not a solid one. But I would hope we would have something next week. Our guys are we're actually pretty straightforward. Of all the funds, we're the simplest. We're about the same size as SURS. We don't have the money purchase. We're about a quarter of the size of TRS, so we're kind of in a pretty good spot when it comes to these things. So I always feel like we have an advantage on timing. I don't.
Historically, that was always the case.
I think our actuaries would be consistently along with that, because there's ongoing analysis on an annual basis of the participants and the plan. And so it's really just clarifying what new features would need to go into that analysis. So I would say we would be consistently around a week or so.
Statistically speaking, I'll be later than them. And in particular to this situation and to this question, I will probably take longer. I'm just bigger and more complicated, unfortunately.
Okay, very good. Representative Ives?
Thank you for recognizing me one more time. Part of the problem with our pension system is that people have lost confidence that is strictly for the people that are entitled to a pension from the state's perspective. You've got union workers, teaching for one day and then getting into the system, right? You've got people that work for IML, Illinois Municipal League, able to access our system. You got people from, associations able to access it. I'm very, very interested in cutting through all the garbage and really making these systems strictly for people who the public and the taxpayers truly believe should be part of the system. I would like your help in identifying and closing absolutely every loophole to this. And then I'd also like a list from all of you, from your particular systems, who's authorized to be in those systems. An entire list, and a very specific, so that it's readable to the taxpayers. And if you could share that with me, I'd appreciate it. If you could share with me and have a conversation about legislation that closes every single loophole and people that are scamming the system, I'm very interested in that. Thank you.
Representative Ives, I would suggest you read Senate Bill 1. We had a very exhaustive list in there of exactly those kinds of things. So I don't see any other members seeking recognition. So with that, we will recess and I'd like to thank the governor's office and the systems for being here today. I found it very informative and helpful in evaluating the proposal. And with that, we will recess to the call of the chair.